The ancient capital city of Pella, nestled within the Kingdom of Macedonia, a child was born in July 356 BCE under the shadow of omens and prophecy. His name would echo through the corridors of time: Alexander III of Macedon, later known as Alexander the Great. His birth was accompanied by celestial signs. According to legend, the temple of Artemis at Ephesus burned the night he was born, an omen interpreted by seers as the mark of a world-changing figure. His father, King Philip II, was a formidable warrior and strategist who had unified the fractious Greek city-states under Macedonian hegemony through diplomacy, marriage alliances, and military might. His mother Olympias was a princess of Epirus and a fervent believer in mysticism and the divine. She often claimed that Alexander was not the son of Philip, but rather the offspring of Zeus, whose presence, she said, had manifested during a lightning storm on the night of conception. Alexander's early years were shaped by the Macedonian court, a mix of politics, ambition, and martial discipline. The Palace of Pella was a bustling nexus of ideas, where warriors and philosophers walked the same halls. Here, the child Alexander was exposed to the complex interplay of power and strategy. Philip II, despite his many conquests, was also a keen intellect. Recognizing the importance of education, he sought the finest tutor for his son, someone who could instill not only knowledge but vision. At the age of 13, Alexander began his studies under the guidance of none other than Aristotle, the famed philosopher and student of Plato. This was no ordinary education. It was a melding of military preparation and philosophical awakening. Under Aristotle, Alexander studied a broad array of subjects: ethics, metaphysics, politics, poetry, and natural sciences. He was especially captivated by the Iliad of Homer, often carrying a copy annotated by Aristotle himself. Alexander admired Achilles, viewing him as both hero and ideal, and sought to emulate his bravery and glory in his own life. Aristotle also taught him about geography and zoology, lessons that would later serve him in the far reaches of his empire when he encountered strange lands and unfamiliar peoples. Alexander's intellectual growth was paralleled by rigorous physical training. Under his father's command, Alexander was taught the art of war from a young age. He trained with the companion cavalry, learned the phalanx formation, and practiced with weapons of every kind. By the time he was 16, Alexander had already taken on regency in Macedonia during Philip's campaign abroad. When a Thracian rebellion threatened the north, Alexander quickly assembled an army, marched to the rebellious territory, crushed the uprising, and founded the city of Alexandropolis. This was the first taste of command, and it left a deep impression. Alexander proved himself not only courageous but strategically gifted, winning the loyalty of his troops and the respect of his father. The defining moment of Alexander's early military career came at the Battle of Chaeronea, fought between the forces of Macedonia and a coalition of Greek city-states, including Athens and Thebes. Philip entrusted his then 18-year-old son with the left wing of the army, a significant position given the importance of the engagement. During the battle, Alexander demonstrated remarkable leadership. Leading the elite companion cavalry, he is said to have delivered a devastating blow to the Theban sacred band, a force of legendary renown. The Macedonian victory at Chaeronea solidified Philip's control over Greece and marked Alexander as more than just a royal heir. He was now a hero of Macedon. Despite their joint military success, relations between Alexander and his father became strained. Philip's many marriages, particularly his union with Cleopatra Eurydice, threatened Alexander's position as heir. Olympias, ever political, withdrew from court, and Alexander followed. For a time, he lived in exile in Illyria, only to return after reconciliation. Tensions persisted, but Alexander knew how to wait, and when Philip was assassinated in 336 BCE during the wedding celebration of his daughter Cleopatra, the 20-year-old Alexander ascended to the throne. Alexander did not inherit a peaceful realm. The moment he was declared king, several Greek states, Thebes, Athens, Thessaly, saw an opportunity to rebel. Neighboring tribes in Thrace and Illyria also prepared for war. Many believed the young king would be weak and indecisive. In a stunning series of campaigns, Alexander reasserted control over the Greek city-states. He marched south to Corinth, where he was declared hegemon of the Hellenic League, and proclaimed his intent to wage war on Persia, a dream long cherished by his father. By 334 BCE, Alexander had unified Greece under the League of Corinth and set his sights on the Persian Empire, the largest, richest empire the world had ever known. Stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, it was ruled by the Achaemenid king Darius III, whose predecessors had once threatened Greece with annihilation. Alexander didn't just want revenge for past Persian invasions. He believed he was destined to conquer Asia and rule as a king of kings. With a combined Macedonian-Greek army of around 35,000 men, he crossed the Hellespont, modern-day Dardanelles, into Asia Minor, following in the footsteps of Achilles, his childhood hero. The campaign against Persia would stretch for nearly a decade, reshaping the world, uniting East and West, and securing Alexander's name in history. It began with a swift and brutal battle on the riverbanks of Granicus. 1. The Battle of Granicus, May 334 BCE. The Granicus River lies in northwestern Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Persian satraps, governors, of Asia Minor gathered their forces to block Alexander's advance. Confident in their cavalry, they chose the steep banks of the Granicus as the site for battle, assuming the river would break the momentum of any Macedonian charge. Most generals would wait until morning to cross a flooded river with heavy cavalry and infantry. Alexander did the opposite. He struck immediately, using shock tactics to exploit enemy overconfidence. He led the companion cavalry across the river first, drawing Persian cavalry into chaotic melee. Meanwhile, the phalanx crossed in support, and his hypaspists, elite infantry, followed behind in precise formations. During the charge, Alexander himself was nearly killed. A Persian noble, Spithridates, raised his axe above Alexander's head. Just as the blade fell, his bodyguard Clitus the Black struck Spithridates down. With Persian lines broken, their cavalry fled and their infantry were routed. Alexander was victorious and ruthless. He executed Greek mercenaries fighting for Persia and sent their severed heads back to Greece as a warning. Granicus opened the gates to Asia Minor. Alexander quickly took Sardis, Ephesus, Miletus, and Halicarnassus. Many cities welcomed him as a liberator from Persian tyranny. He allowed them to retain their governments, demanding only loyalty and garrisons. The Battle of Issus, November 333 BCE. While Alexander was moving south into Phoenicia, King Darius III finally mobilized the full might of the Persian Empire. With a force estimated at 100,000 to 600,000, including cavalry, infantry, archers, chariots, and Greek mercenaries, he moved to trap Alexander in Cilicia. Alexander had taken a slower route through the Cilician gates, leaving his supply lines vulnerable. Darius surprised him by emerging behind his position near the town of Issus. Now the Macedonian army was cut off, outnumbered, and facing the great king himself. Ironically, the narrow plain between the Mount Amanus and the Mediterranean Sea worked against the Persians. Darius could not deploy his massive army effectively. Alexander, on the other hand, thrived in tight conditions with his compact formations and cavalry tactics. Alexander placed his phalanx in the center, flanked by light infantry and companion cavalry on the right. He personally led the charge, again targeting the center, where Darius stood. The Macedonian phalanx smashed into Persian lines, while the cavalry turned Darius's left. Darius fled in panic, abandoning his family, chariot, and royal treasures. His mother, wife, and daughters were captured and treated with honor by Alexander, a gesture that shocked Persia and impressed the world. Issus wasn't just a battlefield victory, it was a political catastrophe for Persia. The defeat of the great king in person shattered Persian prestige. Persian satraps and cities along the eastern Mediterranean surrendered without resistance. Alexander now controlled Phoenicia, Syria, and the coast of Palestine, critical for cutting off Persian naval power. While not traditional battles like Granicus and Issus, the sieges of Tyre and Gaza deserve mention as preludes to Gaugamela. Tyre, a coastal island fortress, resisted Alexander for 7 months. He built a causeway, mole, into the sea, used siege towers, and finally stormed the city. It was one of the bloodiest episodes of the campaign. Gaza, another fortress city, resisted fiercely. Alexander was wounded during the assault. After victory, he executed the defenders and secured the route into Egypt. These victories paved the way for one of Alexander's boldest moves, marching into Egypt, where he was welcomed as a liberator and declared son of Amun-Ra in the Oracle of Siwa. He founded Alexandria and spent months consolidating his control. But the final confrontation with Darius was approaching. The Battle of Gaugamela, October 1st, 331 BCE. Darius assembled his largest army yet. Estimates range from 250,000 to 1 million. He chose the wide plains of Gaugamela, near modern-day Mosul, Iraq, to fully use his chariots and cavalry. Alexander had around 47,000 troops, including 7,000 cavalry, and faced overwhelming odds. But he had something Darius didn't: discipline, cohesion, and genius-level tactical skill. Darius leveled the battlefield for his scythed chariots, designed to mow down infantry. His left was anchored by Bactrian cavalry, the right by Scythians, and the center by Persian nobles and elephants. Alexander arrayed his army with a double echelon. His right flank extended wide to lure the Persian cavalry into a trap. The center was composed of the Macedonian phalanx. The left was commanded by Parmenion, his trusted general. Darius sent in his chariots early, but the Macedonians opened lanes, surrounded, and killed the drivers. Meanwhile, Alexander waited for the perfect moment, then launched a diagonal wedge attack toward Darius's center. As his companion cavalry shattered the lines, Darius panicked again and fled, just like at Issus. But this time, the Persian army collapsed completely. Macedonian forces captured the royal camp, treasury, and key satraps. Gaugamela was the end of Persian imperial power. Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis fell in rapid succession. Alexander entered Persepolis and burned the royal palace, a symbolic act of vengeance for Xerxes' burning of Athens. He proclaimed himself king of Asia and began adopting Persian customs to legitimize his rule. Darius III fled eastward, only to be betrayed and murdered by his own satrap, Bessus. With Darius's death, Alexander declared the Achaemenid Empire dissolved. The Macedonian became not just a conqueror, but a universal king, bridging east and west. The Persian campaign transformed Alexander from a Greek warlord into a global emperor. At Granicus, he proved his daring. At Issus, he broke a king. At Gaugamela, he toppled an empire. His use of combined arms tactics, elite cavalry, and psychological warfare redefined ancient combat. His tolerance of local customs helped stabilize vast new territories. Yet conquest had just begun. Ahead lay Bactria, Sogdiana, and India, lands even further from Greece, and filled with warriors who had never heard his name.
Before Alexander's arrival, Egypt had suffered under Persian rule for almost 2 centuries, broken briefly by a few native dynasties. The Persians, though efficient rulers, were seen by many Egyptians as culturally foreign and religiously insensitive, particularly when they desecrated temples and taxed heavily. By the time Alexander entered Egypt in 332 BCE, he was welcomed not as an invader, but as a liberator. The Persian satrap Macedonia, recognizing the futility of resistance after the fall of Gaza and Tyre, surrendered Egypt without a battle. Alexander marched into Memphis, the old capital of Egypt, and was greeted by Egyptian priests, nobles, and local elites with ceremonial processions, incense, and hymns. He immediately enacted key strategies to legitimize his rule, restored temples desecrated by Persians, reinstated religious festivals and priesthoods, offered sacrifices to traditional deities like Ptah, Osiris, and Ra, participated in Egyptian ceremonies, blending Greek heroism with Egyptian sacred kingship. His respectful behavior earned him not only loyalty, but deification by the Egyptian priesthood, who proclaimed him pharaoh and son of Ra. Alexander's goal was not simply military control. It was universal kingship. In Egypt, this required religious synthesis, not mere rule by force. He was proclaimed chosen by Ra, aligning with traditional pharaonic ideology. Statues were erected of Alexander in Egyptian style, wearing the Nemes headdress and uraeus, sacred cobra. He was inscribed in temples as a divine ruler in hieroglyphs. Unlike the Persians, who governed as outsiders, Alexander ruled as a pharaoh. This religious fusion was not temporary, it was foundational to his imperial strategy. The founding of Alexandria, 331 BCE. One of Alexander's most enduring legacies was the founding of Alexandria, a city that would become the intellectual capital of the ancient world. Located near the Nile Delta, between the Mediterranean Sea and Lake Maroitis, the location was strategically ideal. Natural harbors for military and trade ships, fertile access to the Nile River, positioned between Europe, Africa, and Asia, a true crossroads of civilizations. Alexander envisioned a Hellenistic metropolis, a Greek city in Egypt, governed by Greek architecture, philosophy, and administration, but also respectful of local Egyptian traditions. He personally sketched the layout using grain or flour, according to legend, mapping a massive port on the sea, wide, straight avenues with a grid layout, a massive lighthouse on Pharos Island, later built by Ptolemy, the beginnings of what would become the Library of Alexandria. Founding Alexandria served several purposes: military, a stronghold for future campaigns; political, a message to the world of Alexander's permanence; religious, a fusion of East and West, divine and earthly power; cultural, the cornerstone of Hellenism in Africa; restored full privileges to the priesthoods of Memphis, Thebes, and Heliopolis; donated lavishly to major temples, including those of Karnak and Luxor; had inscriptions made in hieroglyphics. Proclaiming his divine mission, the priests, in turn, legitimized his rule before the gods, as they had done for pharaohs for 3,000 years. This was no mere performance. In a land where divinity and rulership were one, Alexander's willingness to participate in sacred rites sealed his image not just as a king, but as a divine being in the eyes of millions. The journey to the Oracle of Amun at Siwa. Driven by ambition and belief in his divine mission, Alexander made a perilous journey across the western desert to consult the Oracle of Amun-Ra at Siwa Oasis, a sacred temple deep in the sands. Blinding heat and shifting dunes, waterless stretches of land, relying on local guides and omens, including ravens, serpents, and dreams. Yet Alexander pressed on. His goal was not just religious, it was existential. He sought confirmation of his divine status. When he arrived, the priests greeted him as the son of Amun. The exact words have been lost, but ancient accounts say the oracle proclaimed Alexander a god, equal to Amun, Zeus in Greek culture. He left with his belief in divine destiny validated, now openly referring to himself as son of Zeus Ammon, a title he would use across his empire. The Egyptian episode transformed Alexander from a brilliant general into a cosmic ruler. Military conquest became spiritual foo. He saw himself as chosen by the gods to unite mankind. The experience shaped his later policies of integration, tolerance, and divine monarchy. This divine kingship gave him authority to rule Persians, Greeks, Egyptians, and Indians alike, not as a foreign invader, but as a god-king beyond cultural boundaries. Alexander's conquest of Egypt was not marked by bloodshed, but by reverence, adaptation, and visionary legacy. He won not just land, but the hearts of a nation steeped in religion. He was crowned a pharaoh, proclaimed a god, and accepted as a ruler. He founded Alexandria, which would shape the intellectual world for centuries. His time in Egypt was less about war and more about empire building. It was in Egypt, not Persia, that Alexander truly became more than a man in the eyes of the world. By 327 BCE, Alexander had conquered the vast Achaemenid Empire. Persia, Egypt, Babylon, and Bactria were under his rule. Yet, he did not stop. From the eastern frontiers of Sogdiana and Bactria, Alexander looked further east, to the lands beyond the Hindu Kush, where rumors spoke of exotic kingdoms, massive rivers, and war elephants. Driven by ambition, legend, and a hunger to reach the ends of the known world, Alexander began his final great military campaign. The invasion of India, known to the Greeks as Indica. Crossing the Hindu Kush and entering India, Alexander led his troops across the snow-capped passes of the Hindu Kush, enduring extreme cold, thin air, and treacherous terrain. The initial goal was to subdue the border kingdoms of modern-day Pakistan, especially Gandhara and Punjab. Along the way, Alexander faced fierce resistance from mountain tribes, including the Aspasioi and Asakanoi, guerrilla-style ambushes and fortified mountain cities, harsh resistance from tribal warlords, some of whom used war elephants even before the Hydaspes battle. Despite hardships, Alexander adapted, used siege engines in mountain terrain, employed local allies and scouts, won over local kings by diplomacy when possible. Meeting the king of Parava, Porus. As Alexander descended into the Punjab region, he encountered a formidable enemy, King Porus, the ruler of Parava, a kingdom lying between the Hydaspes, Jhelum, and Assassins Chenab rivers. Porus was no minor warlord. He ruled a well-trained army, including 20,000 to 30,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, 300 to 500 chariots, and crucially, 200-plus Indian war elephants, each a tower of muscle and tusks, armored and trained for destruction. Porus refused to submit. He replied to Alexander's envoys with defiance, demanding that the invader return west. Alexander, impressed by Porus's courage, prepared for one of the most difficult battles of his life. The Battle of the Hydaspes, May 326 BCE. The Hydaspes River was swollen with monsoon rains, fast-moving and wide. Porus believed it would be impossible to cross with a full army undetected. Alexander studied the river and waited. For days, he staged feints and made false preparations in full view of Porus's scouts. Then, in the dead of night and under heavy rain, he secretly marched 27 kilometers upstream to a narrow island crossing. With 6,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, Alexander crossed in silence, using boats, hides, and inflated bladders. He landed safely, surprising Porus, who rushed to meet the invaders. Alexander had successfully split the battlefield, isolating part of Porus's forces. The battlefield was soaked and muddy. War elephants lined up in the center, infantry between them, cavalry on the flanks. Alexander led a cavalry assault on Porus's left wing, dispersing his horsemen. Surrounded Porus's flanks using a hammer and anvil tactic. Sent archers and javelin throwers to harass the elephants from a distance. The elephants wreaked havoc, crushing men, scattering horses, and trampling entire phalanx blocks. But Alexander's troops had prepared. They targeted elephant mahouts, drivers, and eyes, opened lanes to let the elephants pass, then attacked from behind, surrounded and isolated each elephant until the panic turned the beasts against their own infantry. Porus stood tall, over 7 feet in height, according to ancient accounts, and fought atop his elephant until the end. Even as his army collapsed, he refused to surrender. Only after being wounded and surrounded did he lay down his weapons. Alexander, impressed by his valor, asked how he wished to be treated. Porus famously replied, "Like a king." Alexander responded, "You shall have all that and more." Despite massive losses, Alexander restored Porus as satrap, governor, of his own kingdom, gave him additional territory east of the Hydaspes, founded two cities, Nicaea, city of victory, and Bucephala, in honor of Bucephalus, his beloved horse, who died during or after the battle. This blend of conquest and integration defined Alexander's strategy in India. Resistance met with force, bravery met with respect. Following the Hydaspes victory, Alexander wanted to push east to the Ganges River, where even larger kingdoms like Magadha awaited. But his army had reached its limit. They had marched over 17,000 kilometers in 8 years, fought in deserts, mountains, rivers, and jungles. Monsoons, disease, and fatigue had demoralized them. At the Hyphasis River, Bes, his men mutinied, refusing to go further. Alexander raged and wept, but ultimately agreed. A massive 12-pillar altar was built to mark the farthest eastward point of his conquests. Instead of taking the safe route back, Alexander chose a southern march through the Gedrosian Desert, modern-day Baluchistan. This decision cost thousands of lives: scorching heat, lack of water, starvation, sandstorms and snake bites, near total collapse of his baggage train. It was one of the deadliest decisions Alexander ever made. Yet, he survived, returned to Babylon, and was now a legend made real. Alexander's Indian campaign tested him as no other campaign had. New cultures, languages, terrains, and battle strategies. Elephants, monsoons, and spiritual kings. A mutiny that forced him to confront the limits of his empire. Though he never reached the Ganges, his victory over Porus at Hydaspes was among his greatest. His Indian legacy would live on through Hellenistic cities in Pakistan and Afghanistan, cultural exchange between Greece and India, Buddhist Greek art in the Gandhara region. Centuries later, India marked both the height of his power and the beginning of his decline. A place where gods and men met in war and honor. The broken edge of conquest. In 326 BCE, after defeating King Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes, Alexander stood triumphant at the edge of the Indian subcontinent. Beyond lay the Ganges River and the mighty Magadhan Empire, ripe with wealth and warriors. But for the first time in nearly a decade, his army refused to go forward. Hardened veterans, many now far from home and weary from continuous battle, mutinied on the banks of the Hyphasis, Bes River. Their defiance marked a turning point in Alexander's campaign, the mutiny at the Hyphasis River. The march east had brought the Macedonian army to unknown lands. Alexander dreamed of reaching the ocean sea at the end of the world, but his soldiers were tired of war, homesick after 8 years of campaigning, disheartened by rumors of massive Indian kingdoms ahead, even stronger than Porus's. Alexander summoned the army and offered a rousing speech, invoking their past glories: Granicus, Issus, Gaugamela, Hydaspes, but this time it failed. The aging general Conus, respected by all, pleaded with Alexander. "Your soldiers long to return to their families. Let them go, and you shall win their hearts forever." Alexander, furious, shut himself in his tent for 3 days, refusing food or speech. But in the end, he relented. At the Hyphasis, he ordered altars to be built, marking the furthest east he would go. These altars, dedicated to Zeus and Heracles, symbolized the divine reach of his conquests. Now turning west, Alexander mapped a grand return route. The army would split into 3 main columns. One group under Nearchus would sail along the coast. Another under Craterus would return through Arachosia and Drangiana, Afghanistan. Alexander himself chose the most dangerous path, through the Gedrosian Desert. Historians debate why he made this decision. Possible reasons include punishment for the army's mutiny, desire to outdo Cyrus the Great, who lost an army there centuries earlier, a bold demonstration of invincibility. Whatever the motive, the consequences were catastrophic. The Gedrosian Desert. The Gedrosian Desert, modern-day Makran in southern Pakistan and Iran, is one of the harshest deserts on Earth, barren with no natural shade, scorching hot winds during the day, freezing at night, little water or vegetation. Alexander led 30,000-plus troops, women, children, and pack animals into this wasteland in 325 BCE. The horrors of the march became legendary. Wells dried up before they arrived. Sands burned the feet of animals and men. Supply lines collapsed, leaving thousands without food or water. Soldiers drank seawater or animal blood to survive. Thousands perished daily from thirst, starvation, sunstroke, and exhaustion. Even Alexander suffered, walking on foot with his men, refusing water unless shared with everyone. At one point, a soldier brought Alexander a helmet full of water. Alexander, parched and sunburned, poured it into the sand in front of his troops, saying, "If not all can drink, then none shall." The gesture restored morale, but not lives. Estimates suggest that over half of the army died in the desert. Horses, elephants, camels. Many were lost. The Bactrian women and children accompanying the army also perished in heartbreaking numbers. Arrival in Carmania, 324 BCE. After months of torment, the survivors emerged in Carmania, southern Iran. There, in a surreal moment, Alexander held a grand Dionysian-style celebration. Soldiers donned flowers and drank wine. Alexander dressed as Dionysus in purple robes. Processions of carts, music, and dancing paraded through towns. It was a victory over death, a celebration that they had survived the impossible. But the toll on the army was irreversible. In Carmania, and later in Susa and Babylon, Alexander attempted to rebuild and unify his empire. He issued a series of bold policies, encouraged intermarriage between Macedonians and Persians, formed an elite guard of Persian youth trained in Macedonian ways, began dressing fully in Persian royal attire. This caused deep unrest among his Macedonian veterans. They felt abandoned and replaced by foreigners. They resented his Eastern identity and divine aspirations. Many believed he no longer respected Greek traditions. The crisis peaked when Alexander discharged many veterans at Opis. The army rioted, shouting insults and throwing weapons at their king. Began dressing fully in Persian royal attire. This caused deep unrest among his Macedonian veterans. They felt abandoned and replaced by foreigners. They resented his Eastern identity and divine aspirations. Many believed he no longer respected Greek traditions. The crisis peaked when Alexander discharged many veterans at Opis. The army rioted, shouting insults and throwing weapons at their king. Alexander's emotional appeal at Opis. Alexander confronted the rebellion with a furious, tearful speech, recorded by historians like Arrian. "You complain that I have adopted foreign customs. I conquered the world, and you cannot conquer your prejudice." He reminded them that he had fought beside them, led every charge, and shared every hardship. He then withdrew his favor, saying he would continue alone with his Persian soldiers if necessary. The army broke down in tears, begging forgiveness, Reconciliation followed, dramatic, emotional, and temporary. The final march to Babylon. In 323 BCE, Alexander returned to Babylon, now the capital of his empire. The city was bustling with engineers planning new cities and roads, ambassadors from India, Ethiopia, Carthage, and Rome, philosophers, scientists, and scribes from all corners of his realm. Alexander began preparing a massive campaign into Arabia, but destiny had other plans. The price of glory, the return journey through the Gedrosian desert, and the mutinies it sparked revealed the limits of conquest. Mutiny at the Hyphasis shattered the illusion of limitless power. Gedrosia humbled even the greatest conqueror. The army's weariness was a reminder that empires are made of men, not myths. Alexander emerged from the desert alive, but transformed. No longer just a king of Macedon, he now ruled a fractured empire stretching from Greece to India, with his dream of unity slipping between his fingers. In 323 BCE, Alexander returned to Babylon, the city he envisioned as the capital of his global empire. Having conquered from the Aegean to the Indus, he had reshaped the known world. But despite all his triumphs, Alexander's final days were not filled with peace or legacy building. They were consumed by tensions, mistrust, and sudden tragedy. In Babylon, divine ambition met mortal limitation, and the dream of a united world unraveled before it could be fully born. Rebuilding the empire, after the arduous return from India and the deadly march through the Gedrosian desert, Alexander arrived in Babylon with renewed vision. He initiated grand construction projects, including a massive palace and administrative center. Plans were underway for a massive harbor to accommodate ocean-bound ships for future Arabian expeditions. Engineers began work on irrigation canals, roads, and new colonies to consolidate control. Alexander remained committed to uniting East and West, encouraged intermarriage between Macedonians and Persians, including his own to Roxana and another to Statera, daughter of Darius, promoted Persian nobles into military and administrative positions, introduced a Persian-style royal court, complete with proskynesis, ritual prostration, which continued to offend Macedonians. His ultimate goal, a cosmopolitan empire, united not by force, but by culture, blood, and shared rule. The Macedonian discontent. Many of his veteran soldiers resented the favor shown to Persians and Easterners. The policy of replacing Macedonian governors with locals fueled paranoia. Alexander's growing sense of divinity, reinforced by Eastern court rituals, made him seem distant and godlike, no longer the approachable general who fought beside them. When Alexander discharged aging Macedonian veterans at Opis, the remaining soldiers rebelled violently, feeling abandoned and replaced. "Go home, cowards. I'll make Persians my companions and heirs." Eventually, after a deeply emotional speech, the men begged forgiveness, and Alexander reconciled them with a mass feast and oath of unity between Macedonians, Persians, and other ethnicities. But beneath the surface, unity was fragile, and tensions ran deep. Mysterious deaths and court intrigue. Alexander's inner circle began to fracture. The execution of Parmenion and Philotas. Years earlier, Alexander had executed Parmenion, his most senior general, and his son Philotas, for alleged conspiracy. This sowed deep fear and mistrust among commanders. The greatest blow came when Hephaestion, Alexander's closest companion and possibly lover, died suddenly of fever or poison in Ecbatana. Alexander was devastated. He fasted and wept for days, ordered a massive funeral pyre with monuments raised across the empire, deified Hephaestion as a hero, executed the physician who failed to save him. This event seemed to shatter Alexander's emotional core. From that moment, he grew more obsessed with death, immortality, and divine identity. The Arabian campaign and final ambitions. Even with the empire under strain, Alexander continued planning. A massive campaign to conquer Arabia, rumored to be full of uncharted wealth. A new navy for the Persian Gulf, led by Admiral Granicus. A massive reorganization of satrapies, merging Greek and Eastern traditions. Establishing colonies of veterans to solidify control from Asia Minor to India. He envisioned an empire ruled by mixed elites, loyal to him alone, not to ethnicity or tradition. Sudden illness and death, June 323 BCE. In early June, Alexander attended a banquet in Babylon. Shortly afterward, he fell ill. Over the next 11 days, his condition rapidly declined. Symptoms: sudden fever, intense abdominal pain, loss of speech, paralysis. He was moved to the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, but no cure was found. Rumors flew. Was it malaria, typhoid, or poison? Natural causes, likely infectious disease, worsened by years of campaign fatigue and wounds. Poison. Some believed Antipater's faction in Macedonia orchestrated his murder. Divine punishment. Others believe the gods had claimed Alexander for daring to act as a god. On June 10th or 11th, 323 BCE, Alexander died. His last recorded words, when asked to whom he left his empire, were, "To the strongest." The legacy of Babylon. In Babylon, Alexander had hoped to build a capital of cultures, uniting Greeks, Persians, Indians, and Egyptians. A temple of immortality, where man could rise to the level of God. A new world order, beyond tribal or national identity. Instead, Babylon became his mausoleum, his body embalmed in honey, placed in a golden sarcophagus, and eventually stolen en route to Alexandria. His empire would collapse, but his influence would endure for centuries. Hellenistic kingdoms dominated the ancient world. Greek language and culture spread across Asia. His image as a god-king, warrior philosopher, and world shaper influenced Caesar, Napoleon, and countless others. The fall of a god. Alexander conquered the world, but he could not conquer time, mortality, or division. In the end, he died young, only 32 years old, left no heir to secure his dream, but planted seeds of global culture, philosophy, and science that would flourish long after him. In Babylon, the boy from Macedonia, who had sought to become Achilles reborn, passed into myth, and thus ended the greatest military campaign in history. Not with a final battle, but with a whispered name, fading into legend.